For heaven's sake, Sarah, don't make this difficult. Your seat is over there. My mother didn't even turn to look at me fully. The words were a quiet hiss, delivered with a tight, social smile that never reached her eyes. She gestured with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand, a diamond tennis bracelet glittering under the ballroom's crystal chandeliers. My eyes followed the direction of her gesture, past the round tables swathed in white linen, past the laughing, champagne-sipping guests, to a dark corner of the room. There, against the wall, like a piece of forgotten luggage, sat a single, cold, metal folding chair. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Just moments before, I had stepped into this gilded cage, the scent of lilies and expensive perfume thick in my throat. The soft strains of a string quartet had filled the air, and a foolish, stubborn little flame of hope had flickered in my chest. Today will be different, I told myself, smoothing down the dove-gray dress I had spent 3 weeks of lunch breaks searching for. It's Amanda's wedding. Today I am family. Now my mother's words echoed in my ears, extinguishing that flame in an instant. The beautiful music sounded mocking, the glittering chandeliers cold and harsh. I had approached the head table with a smile, the heavy, carefully wrapped gift for my sister clutched in my hands. After the check-in girl had looked at me with such pity, I thought there had been a simple mistake, but there was no mistake. This was the plan. What? The word was a breathless whisper. I looked from the lonely chair back to her. The Wilsons are sitting with us, she murmured, her gaze already drifting toward Amanda's new, wealthy in-laws. They were so generous with their gift. Amanda made an arrangement for you. Now please, go sit down. You're blocking the view. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between me and them. My father, seated beside her, gave a weak, uncomfortable smile and busied himself with his water glass, refusing to meet my eyes. He was a silent accomplice, as always. And Amanda, the golden child, the radiant bride, simply glanced over, her expression not one of malice, but of complete and utter indifference, as if I were a slightly inconvenient waiter. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck and burned my cheeks. The gift in my hands, a set of expensive crystal barware that represented 2 months of careful saving, suddenly felt absurdly heavy. I had wanted to give her something beautiful, something lasting. All they had given me in return was a clear public declaration of my worth to them. I felt the curious, pitying stares of aunts and cousins as I turned away from the warmth and laughter of the head table. My feet felt like lead as I began the long, solitary walk across the plush carpet. It was a walk of shame, each step taking me further away from the illusion of family and deeper into the cold reality of my position. With every footfall, a memory surfaced, a birthday where Amanda got a pony and I got a book on accounting, a graduation where their cheers for her drowned out the mention of my name, 1,000 tiny cuts that had led to this gaping wound. I finally reached the chair. It was as cold and uninviting as it looked. I sank into it, the metal groaning softly under my weight. From here, I had a perfect view of the entire charade, the happy couple, the proud parents, the perfect family tableau. They were a beautiful picture, and I was the smudge on the glass they had tried to wipe away into a corner. I placed the heavy gift on the floor beside me, my hands trembling slightly. The violins swelled, playing a song of love and unity, and in that moment, sitting alone in the shadows, I felt a strange and terrifying calm settle over me. The pain was still there, sharp and deep, but beneath it, something new and hard was beginning to form. Hope was dead, and in its place, a cold, clear-eyed resolve was born. The ballroom was a world under glass, and I was on the outside looking in. I sat on my metal throne of shame, watching the party move and swirl in a pantomime of happiness. Waiters glided by with silver trays, careful to avert their eyes. I made myself small, hoping the potted fern beside me might grow another few feet and swallow me whole. The music was a dull, meaningless thrum in the background, a soundtrack to my own private funeral. It was in this bubble of silence that their voices cut through the noise, sharp and clear. They came from just around the corner, in a small alcove leading to the powder room, hidden from my view, but their words carrying effortlessly in the grand room's acoustics. "The head table looks absolutely divine, Amanda," one of her bridesmaids gushed. Then came my sister's laugh. It was a sound I knew intimately, high and bright, but with a brittle edge, like wind chimes made of glass. "Isn't it? Honestly, it was a last-minute panic." "What happened?" "Oh, you know," Amanda said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial giggle. "The Wilsons, they were being a little particular. They made it clear they expected to be at the head table with Mom and Dad. And well, between you and me—" A pause. "They covered the entire cost of our honeymoon in Hawaii, first-class flights, the whole 9 yards. The bridesmaid gasped, "No, Amanda, that's amazing." "I know, right?" Amanda's voice was giddy with triumph. "So we had a choice to make. It was either them or Sarah, but Sarah is so easygoing, you know. She'll understand. It's not a big deal to her." Another light, tinkling laugh. "A seat for a paradise. Honestly, it was a bargain. Hawaii." The word exploded silently in my mind, and the sound of Amanda's laughter became a deafening roar, drowning out the violins, the chatter, everything. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a transaction. My gaze fell to the crisp, white envelope resting in my lap. I had already put the larger, boxed gift on the gift table. This one was separate. Inside the card, tucked into a small paper flap, was a check. I had gone to the bank yesterday to have it drawn. It was for $5,500. It was nearly every spare cent I had saved over the past 2 years, working overtime on a data-crunching project that had stolen my nights and weekends. I'd imagined their faces when they opened it, a sum that could pay for a honeymoon or a significant down payment on a car. I had wanted to help, to contribute, to finally be seen as a pillar of the family, not a burden. But my seat had already been sold for a trip to Hawaii. I had been weighed, measured, and priced. And the final valuation was that my presence was worth less than a luxury vacation. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It was followed by a wave of pain so profound it left me numb, utterly still in my metal chair. Every last desperate fantasy I'd clung to, that deep down they loved me, that one day they would see me, shattered into a million pieces. There was nothing left to break. And in the hollow space where all that foolish hope had been, something new began to crystallize. The pain didn't curdle into tears. It flash froze, hardening into a calm so absolute it felt terrifying. I was no longer a guest. I was a creditor, and this family was severely in debt. My movements were smooth, deliberate. I stood up from the metal chair without a sound. The performance was over, and I was stepping off the stage. There was no hesitation in my stride as I walked not toward the exit, but toward the gift table near the entrance. A few guests watched, their curiosity piqued by the girl who had been sitting alone and was now moving with such unnerving purpose. At the table, laden with elegantly wrapped presents, I located the white envelope I had placed there earlier. My fingers were steady as I slipped a nail under the seal, opening it with a quiet tear. I slid the congratulatory card out, opened it, and removed the pristine bank check for $5,500. I folded it twice, neatly, and tucked it into the small zipped compartment of my purse where I kept my driver's license. Then, from the main billfold, I pulled out the single, crumpled $1 bill I kept for emergencies. I placed it inside the card, slid the card back into the envelope, and licked the seal closed. Envelope in hand, I turned and began walking toward the exit. My path took me directly past the head table. My mother saw me coming. Her eyes narrowed into angry slits. As I drew level, she leaned toward me, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "Don't you dare embarrass us." I stopped and looked directly into her eyes, my own gaze as cold and clear as a winter sky. "Don't worry," I said, my voice even and low, each word a carefully placed shard of ice. "I'm done being a part of this play." And then I walked on. I heard a chair scrape back. "Sarah, what the hell do you think you're doing?" It was Amanda. She was scrambling after me. A frantic swirl of white lace and tulle, her perfect bridal face contorted with outrage. She caught up to me in the grand hallway just outside the ballroom doors. I stopped and turned to face her, the picture of calm. "What am I doing?" I repeated her question, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I'm just correcting a clerical error. Turns out my place in this family is worth exactly one honeymoon in Hawaii. You sold it, so I've decided to treat myself to a vacation instead." I held up the envelope. "This is what's left for you, my residual value." I let the envelope drop from my fingers. It fluttered to the polished marble floor, landing at the hem of her extravagant wedding dress. Then I turned my back on her, on all of them, and walked out into the cool night air, not once looking back. I drove for an hour, maybe two, with no destination. The city light smeared across the windshield like wet paint, a blur of reds and whites that matched the chaos in my head. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears, a solid cold mass that had settled in the pit of my stomach. But beneath the crushing weight of it all, a strange, unfamiliar feeling began to flutter. Lightness. The strings that had tied me to their approval, that had forced me to dance and contort myself into a shape they might find acceptable, had been severed. The emptiness was vast and terrifying, but it was also my own. The next few days passed in a haze of silence. My small apartment, once a place of quiet solitude, became a fortress. I turned my phone on silent, watching the screen light up with a detached curiosity. The messages, when they finally came, were exactly what I expected. First, my mother. "I hope you're satisfied. You've created a terribly awkward situation for everyone." Then, hours later, my father. "Sarah, we need to talk." Not a single, "Are you okay?" Not one, "We're sorry." Their words weren't olive branches. They were commands, attempts to pull me back into the narrative where I was the difficult one, the problem to be managed. I read them once, then deleted the threads. The silence I gave them in return was no longer a sign of my submission. It was a wall they could not breach. That weekend, instead of wallowing, I did what I do best. I looked for the data. In the back of my closet was a dusty storage bin, filled with old photo albums and memorabilia. I hauled it into the living room, the plastic groaning under the weight of a past I had tried to romanticize. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for the pattern, and I found it on every page. There was Amanda at her 5th birthday party with a Shetland pony my father had rented for the day. I was in the background, holding a single balloon. There was Amanda on Christmas morning, buried in a mountain of presents, while my pile consisted of 3 neatly wrapped practical gifts: socks, a sweater, and a new textbook. Then I saw the picture that stopped my breath. We were children, maybe 7 and 9, standing in front of the fireplace on a Sunday afternoon. Amanda was beaming, clutching a magnificent porcelain doll with golden curls and a frilly pink dress. It was an expensive collector's item I knew she had coveted for months. In my arms, I held a thick, hardcover copy of A Brief History of Time. I remember the feel of its glossy cover, the weight of the pages. I looked so serious in the photo, a small, somber child, already aware of her assigned role. The memory of my mother's voice attached to that image was as clear as if she were standing in the room with me. She was speaking to an aunt who had asked about our disparate gifts. Amanda needs pretty things to inspire her imagination, my mother had explained with a breezy confidence. Sarah is the smart one. For her, books are enough. I closed the album. The plastic cover felt cool beneath my hands. It had never been about love. It had been about casting. Amanda was cast as the star, the one to be adorned and admired. I was cast as the supporting character, the practical, reliable, low-maintenance one who required nothing more than intellectual sustenance. The wedding wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was simply the final act of a play that had been written long before I could even read. And I was finally, irrevocably, done playing my part. A week into my self-imposed exile, a number I didn't recognize flashed on my screen. I'd been letting all calls go to voicemail, but something made me answer this one. "Hello? Sarah, kiddo, it's your Uncle Ben." Relief, warm and immediate, washed over me. Uncle Ben, my mother's younger brother, was a gentle, quiet man who worked as a high school woodshop teacher. In a family of loud pronouncements and sharp edges, he was the only one who had ever spoken to me in a consistently soft voice. "Hi, Uncle Ben." "Hey, I just wanted to call and see how you were doing. After the wedding," he added, his voice laced with a gentle awkwardness. He wasn't calling to scold or demand. He was calling to check on me. The simple decency of it almost broke the dam of my composure. "I'm okay," I lied, the words tasting like ash. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the faint sound of him sighing on the other end. "No, you're not," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. "And you have every right not to be. What they did was, well, it was wrong." My throat tightened. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever validated my feelings. He hesitated, and the quality of the silence changed. It became heavier, freighted with something he was struggling to say. "Sarah, listen, there's something else. Something I think you have a right to know." I waited, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Did you know that your dad needs to have a heart procedure? A valve replacement," he said, his voice dropping lower. "It's nothing critical, not yet, but the doctor wanted it done months ago. The out-of-pocket cost after their insurance is about $6,000. The number was a punch to the gut. It was so close to the amount on the check I had almost given them. A cruel, cosmic coincidence. "What?" I whispered, my hand instinctively going to the wall beside me for support. The cheap paint felt cool and solid under my palm, grounding me as the room began to tilt. "They decided to postpone it," Ben continued, the weariness in his voice so profound it felt ancient. "They wanted to make sure Amanda's wedding was perfect. They told me that you knew about the surgery and that you had agreed to help with the wedding fund instead, that you wanted Amanda to have her day. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The world went silent. All I could hear was the blood rushing past my eardrums and my uncle's heavy breathing. Suddenly, a flash of memory from the wedding seared itself into my mind. My father, standing at the head table, raising his glass for a toast. I had thought at the time that the lighting was making him look pale, a slight grayish pallor beneath his wedding day tan. I had dismissed it. Now the image was horrifying. The emptiness that had hollowed me out for a week was suddenly filled. It wasn't filled with sorrow. It was filled with a rage so cold, so pure, it felt like a block of ice forming in my chest. This wasn't just about my feelings anymore. This wasn't about being ignored or disrespected. They had taken my love, my financial sacrifice, and used it as a justification to gamble with my father's life. Their casual selfishness had metastasized into something monstrous. The last flicker of hesitation, the last lingering scrap of childish hope for reconciliation, was vaporized in that moment. This was no longer a family drama. This was about a fundamental betrayal of human decency. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I could not and would not let it stand. It was my father who called 2 days after my conversation with Uncle Ben. The call came from a blocked number, but I knew his weary sigh before he even said my name. "Sarah," he started, his voice thin and tired, strained by more than just a bad phone connection. "Your mother and we'd like you to come for dinner on Sunday. Just the 4 of us. A quiet family dinner." The rage that had been a block of ice in my chest for 48 hours didn't melt. It sharpened. A quiet family dinner. They wanted to set the stage, to bring me back to their home turf where they held all the power, where the very walls were papered with memories of my insignificance. They thought they could manage me. "I'll be there," I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. I wasn't agreeing to a truce, I was accepting an invitation to the theater, and I was morbidly curious to see how they would perform their next act. Stepping into that house on Sunday was like stepping back in time, only now I saw everything in high definition. The air was thick with the rich, savory scent of my mother's lasagna. It was her signature apology dish, a culinary olive branch she extended after her worst offenses. A silent demand for forgiveness, baked in layers of pasta and cheese. For 25 years, that smell had meant comfort. Tonight, it smelled like a trap. They were all there, arranged in the living room like a carefully staged photograph. My father sat in his recliner, looking smaller than I remembered, his skin still holding that unhealthy grayish tint. Amanda was perched on the arm of the sofa, scrolling through her phone, her face a mask of bored indifference. My mother, however, was in motion, a whirlwind of forced hospitality. "Sarah, you're here," she chirped, wiping her hands on her apron as she came to give me a stiff, one-armed hug that I did not return. "Dinner is almost ready. Go on, sit down." The dinner table was a battlefield of unspoken tension. The air was so heavy it felt difficult to breathe. We passed the salad bowl in silence. My father cleared his throat and asked about my work, a topic he had never once shown genuine interest in. I gave him a bland one-sentence answer. The clinking of forks against plates was deafening. Then came the main event. My mother carried the lasagna to the table with a flourish, the melted cheese bubbling and golden. She set it down and picked up the silver spatula. "Sarah, you must be starving," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. She cut into the dish, making a great show of getting the first perfect centerpiece. It was the largest one, the corner piece with the crispy edges that I had always loved as a child. She slid it onto a plate and placed it in front of me with a meaningful look, a silent plea and a command all in one. "Here is my offering. Now you will behave." I looked down at the plate. Years ago, that gesture would have filled me with a pathetic, desperate gratitude. It would have been a crumb of affection I would have cherished for weeks. But now, seeing it for the manipulative ploy it was, a wave of nausea rolled through me. The rich, cheesy offering looked obscene. It was the price of my silence, and it wasn't nearly high enough. I picked up my fork, but didn't take a bite. I would wait. I knew this was just the overture. The real performance was about to begin. They let the silence hang for another minute, a shared breath before the plunge. My father was the one to break it. He pushed a stray noodle around his plate with his fork, his eyes fixed on the task as if it were the most important thing in the world. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and strained, we were really counting on that money you had planned to give. Amanda and Michael are in a bit of a tight spot starting out. Some unexpected expenses from the wedding, you know how it is." He still couldn't look at me. The cowardice was so profound, it was almost pitiable. My mother, however, had no such compunction. She placed her fork down with a delicate click and fixed me with a look of maternal disappointment she had perfected over a lifetime. "Your father is right," she added, her tone smooth and reasonable. "You're doing so well for yourself with that data job of yours. What's a little help for your sister? It's what families do. We support each other." For the first time all evening, Amanda looked up from her phone, her eyes flashing with a familiar, petulant fire. "Frankly, you owe us," she snapped. "You completely humiliated me. Do you have any idea how many people asked what was wrong with my sister? You made a scene." A laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was dry and sharp, like scraping rust from old iron. The sound was so unexpected, it made all three of them flinch. "Embarrassed?" I said, finally picking up my own fork and pointing the tines at Amanda. "You want to talk about embarrassment? I'll tell you about embarrassment." I shifted my gaze to my mother, then my father, making sure to hold each of their stares. My voice was level, almost conversational, but it cut through the thick atmosphere of the dining room like a scalpel. "That $5,500, I began. "Does anyone at this table remember where that money came from? Or do you just see it as a number in my bank account that you're entitled to?" Silence. My father's jaw tightened. "I'll remind you," I continued, the calm in my voice making them more and more uneasy. "It was the inheritance that Grandma Helen left for me, every single penny of it. When she died, she left Amanda her jewelry. She left you," I said, nodding at my mother, "the antique furniture. And she left me a check. In the letter that came with it, she wrote 10 words. I could see the letter in my mind's eye, her elegant, looping handwriting on the page. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "Use this to build a life you can be proud of, Sarah." I let the words hang in the air, a testament to a love and belief that was utterly absent from this room. Grandma wanted me to build a future, to invest in myself, not to pay off the credit card debt for a wedding that cost more than my car, not to fund a honeymoon in Hawaii. I saw a flicker of panic in Amanda's eyes, and certainly not to do it while my own father is postponing heart surgery. because this family's priorities are so grotesquely twisted. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from my father's face, leaving behind that same sick gray pallor I'd seen at the wedding. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. My mother's mouth opened and closed silently, her mask of maternal concern shattered, revealing the raw shock beneath. She was utterly speechless, a state so unnatural for her it was frightening. And Amanda, the golden child, could only stammer, her voice a pathetic squeak. How did you know about that?" I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The untouched plate of lasagna sat before me like a mockery. I stood up, no longer a supplicant at their table, no longer the family scapegoat. For the first time in my life, in this house, I was the one holding all the power. I was the one passing judgment. "You traded your husband's health for a party," I said to my mother. "You were willing to let your father risk his life so you could have a vacation," I said to my sister. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a final, dying ember of pity for my father. "You let them do it." I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving them there in the wreckage of their quiet family dinner. I didn't need to hear their excuses or their denials. Their faces, frozen in a tableau of guilt and shock, had told me everything I ever needed to know. The drive home was a silent film. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a profound, hollow stillness. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt clear, as if a dense fog I had been living in my entire life had finally lifted, revealing a stark, unforgiving landscape. There was no going back into that fog. There was nothing there for me. Back in my apartment, I made myself a cup of tea. The simple ritual, a small anchor in the vast emptiness. I was sitting on my sofa, cradling the warm mug, when my phone, which I'd left on the counter, buzzed. It wasn't a call, but a notification. New voicemail from Amanda. My heart didn't leap. My stomach didn't drop. I simply stood up, walked over to the phone, and pressed play, holding it to my ear with a detached, clinical curiosity. The voice that filled the silence of my apartment was not the screeching, indignant tone of the bride in the hallway. It was something far more chilling. It was low, controlled, and slick with venom. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, Sarah." Amanda's voice began, a soft hiss of poison. "But you need to stop, right now. You think you're so smart, digging up all this private family business? You want to make us look bad? You need to remember that it's your word against ours." There was a pause, a moment for the threat to coalesce. "If you keep pushing this, if you try to blow up this family, I will make sure everyone, and I mean everyone, knows the truth about you. How bitter you've always been, how jealous, how you could never just be happy for me. Don't think for a second that people will believe the little charity case over the rest of us. You will regret it." The message ended. The automated voice informed me I had no more messages. I listened to it one more time, just to be sure. I heard the threat, but it had no power. It was a weapon designed to wound a person I no longer was. Her leverage, my desperate need for their love, my fear of their disapproval, had been incinerated in the fire of her own making. What she didn't understand was that I no longer cared what their world thought of me. I didn't want a seat at their table anymore. I wanted to burn the whole damn table to the ground. Her threat wasn't a cage, it was a key. It was the final, unambiguous permission I needed to lock the door for good. With the calm of a surgeon finishing a procedure, I opened my contacts list. I found her name, Amanda. My thumb hovered over the block this caller option for a single, ceremonial second before pressing down firmly. A confirmation pop-up appeared. I pressed block contact. Her name vanished from my recent calls. Next, I scrolled to Mom. Block this caller, block contact. Then Dad, block this caller, block contact. 3 simple taps, 3 ghosts exorcised. I set the phone down, face down on the counter. A deep, cleansing breath filled my lungs. I walked over to my laptop, opened it, and was greeted by the glow of the screen. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the address of an airline website. I didn't search for flights to Hawaii. I searched for a quiet, coastal town in Maine I had once seen in a magazine. A place that promised rocky shores and solitude. A one-way ticket. Departing in 3 days. The total price appeared on the screen. It was a significant sum, but far less than $5,500. I pulled the check from my purse, Grandma Helen's legacy, and placed it on the desk beside me. I wasn't using it to fund their lies. I was using it to build a life I could be proud of. My cursor hovered over the Confirm Purchase button. There was no hesitation. I clicked. The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life. For the first time, silence wasn't a punishment or an awkward pause between cruelties. It was a vast open space that belonged entirely to me. The constant low-grade hum of anxiety that had been my lifelong companion, the subconscious bracing for the next slight, had simply vanished. I woke up in the mornings and made coffee, and the only sound was the gurgle of the machine. There was no phantom buzz in my pocket, no dread of a phone call that would curdle my day. I had canceled the flight to Maine, deciding to save the trip for a true celebration, not an escape. My small apartment transformed from a hiding place into a genuine sanctuary. Then, one Tuesday evening, an email landed in my inbox like a stone, tossed into a still pond. It was from a generic Gmail account, cjennings88, an address I didn't recognize, but whose initial felt like a cold finger tracing my spine. The subject line was the true hook, a masterfully crafted piece of bait. An important night for your father, my first instinct. A raw, primal urge for self-preservation was to drag it straight to the trash, unread, to let it sit there with the spam and the junk mail until it was permanently erased, but I knew I couldn't. This wasn't over. They wouldn't allow it to be. With a steady hand, I clicked it open. The text was short, formal, and reeked of my mother's signature blend of manipulation and plausible deniability. Sarah, I know we have our differences, but I am writing to you now about your father. As you know, he is a longtime supporter of City General Hospital, and he has been asked to give a keynote speech at their annual fundraising gala in 2 weeks. It is a great honor for him and a very important night for our family's reputation in the community. I had to stop and reread that line. Our family's reputation, not his health, not his happiness, reputation. The hollow god they worshipped above all else. He needs his whole family there in the front row, showing a united front. An empty seat would raise questions that would be painful for him to answer. I am not asking for myself. I am asking you to please put your feelings aside for one evening and be there for your father. I read the email 3 times, dissecting it like a hostile legal document. The appeal to duty, the strategic weaponizing of my father's pain. The classic guilt trip, be there for your father, designed to paint any refusal as a selfish, cruel act against a sick man. And the most glaring element of all, its complete, breathtaking lack of an apology. They hadn't learned a thing. They didn't see their actions as wrong. They saw my reaction as a public relations problem to be managed. It was a trap, so obvious and so elegantly constructed. They wanted to parade me in front of their wealthy, influential friends, the very people whose opinions they valued more than their own daughter's well-being. They wanted to put me back in my box, forcing me into a public performance of the happy, perfect family. My presence would be their silent, smiling proof that all was well, that the little drama was over, that they were still in control. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, looking down at the indifferent city lights. They thought they were setting a trap for me, but as I stared into the darkness, a different thought began to form, cold and sharp and lethal. They weren't building a trap. They were building a stage. They were inviting me onto their most important platform, in front of their most important audience. A room full of people obsessed with the performance of charity and public image. They were handing me a microphone and a spotlight, and they were so arrogant, so blinded by their own narrative of my weakness, that they could never imagine I would write my own script. I walked back to the laptop. My posture had changed. I was no longer a woman in hiding. I was a strategist accepting the terms of engagement. My fingers were calm as they found the keys. I hit reply. The cursor blinked on the blank page. I'll be there. I sent the email without another thought. The click of the mouse was a sound of finality. I wasn't going to that gala to reconcile or to pretend. I was going to end this. And I was going to do it in the one place they could not run or hide, the court of public opinion they held so dear. The Fairmont Hotel ballroom was a cathedral of manufactured compassion. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto hundreds of guests dressed in their finest evening wear. The air hummed with the polite murmur of wealth and influence. The clinking of glasses, the rustle of silk, the carefully modulated laughter of people who understood the importance of being seen at the right charity event. My mother was in her element. From across the room, I could see her gliding between tables, a dazzling smile fixed on her face, her hand briefly touching a shoulder here, a forearm there. She was the co-chair of the gala, the benevolent queen of this gilded stage, and she was giving the performance of a lifetime. When I stepped through the grand archway, a ripple of silence followed me. I was not the girl from the wedding, the one in the simple gray dress, folded into a corner. Tonight, I had come dressed for battle. I wore a tailored suit of the deepest midnight blue, its sharp lines and silk lapels a stark contrast to the frothy gowns around me. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, severe style, and my makeup was understated but sharp. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be seen. I saw the exact moment my family spotted me. My father, standing near the bar, physically flinched, his hand faltering as he raised a glass of club soda. Amanda, standing with her husband, simply froze, her mouth falling slightly open. But it was my mother's reaction that was the most telling. Her perfect smile didn't vanish, it tightened, stretched thin, by a sudden visible effort. For a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes, before the mask of the gracious hostess slammed back into place. She began moving toward me, her path a masterclass in social navigation, never turning her back on anyone important, a warm word for everyone she passed. When she reached me, her smile was blinding. "Sarah, darling," she breathed, her voice a low, urgent whisper, for my ears only. "You look wonderful." She reached for my arm, her fingers like talons ready to clamp down, to physically pull me into her orbit, and demonstrate to the entire room that her family was whole. I didn't pull away. I simply shifted my weight, causing her hand to slide off my sleeve. It was a small, quiet movement, but it was an absolute rejection. "I came to hear Dad's speech," I said, my voice cool and even, loud enough for only her to hear. Her eyes narrowed. The panic was back, warring with a rising tide of fury. She was losing control of the narrative, and it terrified her. "Your table is this way," she hissed, gesturing toward a large, prominently placed table where my father and Amanda were now stiffly waiting. "No, thank you," I said calmly. "I've already found my seat." I turned from her and walked away, leaving her standing there, her perfect smile frozen on her face. I didn't walk to the back of the room. I walked toward the front, my heels clicking with quiet confidence on the polished floor. Near the stage, at a table with a clear view of the podium, Uncle Ben stood up as I approached. He had come just as he'd promised, his simple tweed jacket a bastion of quiet integrity in this sea of tuxedos and sequins. He pulled out my chair for me, his expression a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. "You ready for this, kiddo?" he asked softly as I sat down. I looked past him, my eyes settling on the empty podium at the center of the stage. I watched my mother regain her composure and glide back to her table, a commander returning to her troops. They were all watching me, their confusion and anger a palpable force from across the room. They had set the stage, but I had just chosen my position on it, and it was a much, much better seat. "I'm ready," I said, my voice filled with a calm I had never known. "Let the show begin." After a dessert of miniature cheesecakes and a brief self-congratulatory video about the hospital's new wing, the master of ceremonies returned to the podium. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed slightly, casting a warm, intimate glow over the room as a hush of anticipation fell. And now, the MC boomed, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "It is my distinct honor to introduce a man whose generosity and commitment to this community are as boundless as his success. A pillar of our city and the co-chair of tonight's wonderful event, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Richard Jennings." Polite, sustained applause filled the room. From my table near the stage, I had a clear, unobstructed view as my father walked to the podium. He looked polished, the picture of a benevolent patriarch in his tailored tuxedo. He smiled out at the crowd, but I could see the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted the microphone. He was a good actor, but I knew the script too well. He began to speak, his voice smooth and practiced, hitting all the familiar notes. He spoke of legacy, of building something that lasts. He spoke of the importance of health, calling it the one true wealth, without which all other treasures are meaningless. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He spoke of community, of the sacred duty we all have, to lift each other up in times of need. It was a beautiful speech, filled with noble sentiments that I now knew were utterly, damnably hollow. He saved the most potent lie for last. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before landing directly on his family's table. His voice grew thick with manufactured emotion. "None of what I do, none of this would be possible without the foundation of my life, my rock," he said, his eyes glistening under the stage lights. "My incredible wife, Catherine, and my two wonderful, supportive daughters, Amanda and Sarah, who inspire me to be a better man every single day. Thank you." The applause was thunderous. People at the surrounding tables turned to smile warmly at my mother's table. She preened, giving a regal nod and dabbing at a non-existent tear with the corner of a napkin. Amanda smiled graciously, the perfect daughter. The lie, so bold and so public, settled over the room like a benediction. It didn't ignite a fresh wave of anger in me. It did something far more potent. It solidified my resolve into something as hard and as clear as diamond. After the applause died down, the MC returned to the stage. "Thank you, Richard, for those moving words. Truly, a testament to the power of family. Now, as is our tradition, we'd like to open the floor to any of our generous patrons who might wish to share a word before we begin the final pledge drive. I believe our esteemed co-chair, Catherine Jennings, has a few words." My mother began to rise from her chair, a practiced look of humble surprise on her face. But I was already moving. I stood up. The simple act of rising from my chair sent a ripple of confusion through the nearby tables. The scrape of the leg against the polished floor was a small, sharp sound in the expectant hush. I didn't wait to be called upon. I walked with a steady, unhurried pace to the secondary microphone, set up on the side of the stage. A spotlight operator, momentarily confused, swung a brilliant beam of light away from my mother and onto me, catching me in a circle of pure white. The entire ballroom fell silent. Every eye was on me. I could feel the force of my family's collective glare, a psychic wave of pure fury and panic washing over me. I reached the microphone and adjusted its height, the small metallic click echoing in the cavernous silence. I looked out at the sea of hundreds of expectant faces. "Good evening," I began, my voice perfectly calm and clear, amplified so that it reached every corner of the room. "My name is Sarah Jennings. I was so incredibly moved by my father's words on the importance of family and health, and it made me want to share a brief story about just that." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build. I could see my mother, frozen halfway out of her chair, her face a mask of abject horror. "A few months ago," I continued, my tone even, almost conversational, "my father was advised by his doctors that he needed a heart procedure, a necessary valve replacement. At the very same time, my sister was planning her beautiful wedding. My family found themselves with a difficult choice to make: a father's health or a daughter's dream wedding." A low murmur, a current of intrigue, began to spread through the room. People were leaning forward in their seats. "They chose the wedding," I stated, the 4 simple words landing like stones in a silent pool. "They postponed my father's surgery, deciding his heart could wait." The murmuring grew louder, laced now with whispers of shock and disbelief. For a brief second, I flicked my eyes toward their table. My father's face was ashen. My mother had her hand clasped over her mouth. Amanda was staring at me, her face a mixture of fury and utter incomprehension. "They also counted on my financial help to pay for that wedding," I went on, my voice never wavering. "Specifically, they counted on the inheritance my grandmother left me, money she had instructed me to use to build my own future. And when I arrived at that wedding, eager to celebrate with my family, I found that my seat at their table had been sold to another guest in exchange for a more expensive wedding gift." The room was now utterly, deathly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every single person was staring, mouths agape, no longer trying to hide their shock. "Tonight," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound power, "we are all here to raise money for this hospital, to save lives. But I have to wonder what charity really means if we are willing to trade the health of our own loved ones for a party, for a vacation. So tonight, in the spirit of putting health and family first, I would like to pledge $20,000 to the hospital's cardiac surgery fund." A collective gasp swept the room. I took a step back from the microphone, my heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against my ribs. This is money I earned myself, through hard work and long hours. Money that was never meant to patch the holes in this family's vanity. And I hope, with all my heart, that it finds its way to a family who truly understands how to prioritize what is most important. I placed the microphone back into its cradle. The small metallic click was the only sound in the vast, silent room. It felt like a gavel striking, a verdict delivered. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked with a steady, measured pace, my back straight, my gaze fixed on the grand exit doors at the far end of the ballroom. I did not look back. To look back would be to ask for a reaction, and I was long past caring. My back was a wall, and behind it, a world was collapsing. I could feel it, though. I could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes, not on me, but on the tableau of ruin I had left behind. I could picture my mother, still half risen from her chair, frozen in the spotlight like a statue carved from pure horror, her perfect social universe having just imploded. I could imagine my father, whose moving words about family now hung in the air like a foul odor, his head bowed, unable to meet the gaze of a single person in the room as his precious reputation turned to ash. And I could almost hear the choked, ragged sobs beginning to escape from Amanda. Not tears of remorse, but the hot, angry tears of a princess, whose castle had just been publicly stormed and its foundations shattered. The perfect family, the pillars of the community, exposed as a sham before the very audience they had spent a lifetime cultivating. The silence in the room was their judgment. It was the sound of their world ending. And as I walked through it, leaving them to drown in the wreckage, I felt nothing but the clean, cool promise of the open door ahead. I didn't watch the news or read the society pages. I didn't need to. The silence that followed the gala was more telling than any headline. It was a profound, undisturbed peace, the kind that settles after a fever has broken. I worked, I read, I took long walks through the city, feeling the sun on my face without the familiar shadow of their expectations looming over me. About a month later, Uncle Ben called. His voice was warm, as always, but tinged with a deep weariness. "Just calling to check in, kiddo," he said. "See how you're holding up." "I'm good, Uncle Ben, really good," I said, and for the first time in my life, the words were completely true. "How are things?" There was a long pause, and I heard him sigh. "Well," he began, his voice low and heavy, "the bomb you dropped had quite a blast radius." He didn't sound accusatory, just like a man reporting facts from a battlefield. He told me the story, not in a rush of gossip, but with the slow, sad cadence of a family eulogy. The gala, he said, had ended in a flurry of awkward, whispered goodbyes. The pledge drive was a disaster. No one wanted to follow my speech. My mother and father didn't even stay to the end. They simply vanished. The next week, my mother received a call from the chairman of the hospital board. It was suggested, in the kindest, most gentlemanly of terms, that perhaps it was time for her to step back from her duties to focus on her family. She resigned the next day. The charity balls, the committee luncheons, the entire social stage upon which she had built her identity was gone. Amanda's new life wasn't faring much better. The Wilsons, who valued their pristine reputation above all else, were horrified. There was no dramatic confrontation, just a polite but unmistakable cooling. The invitations to the country club stopped. The calls to Amanda from her new mother-in-law became less and less frequent. The honeymoon in Hawaii, Ben told me, had apparently been a very expensive price to pay for a lifetime of social frost. And my father, he finally had the surgery. The hospital, in a move of either extreme generosity or extreme public relations savvy, had covered the remaining costs. He was recovering well, physically, but the house, Ben said, was like a tomb. No one spoke of what had happened. They simply orbited each other in a cold, silent space, the ghosts of their former lives. They had lost the one thing they truly worshipped, the admiration of others, their reputation, the currency they had traded my entire life to accumulate, was now worthless. I listened to it all, a quiet observer to a life that no longer felt like mine. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying thirst for revenge being quenched. There was only a deep, somber sense of finality. They just don't understand how it all went so wrong, Ben said, his voice filled not with satisfaction, but with a profound, weary sadness. They're trapped in the rubble, pointing fingers at you, at each other, at everyone but themselves. He sighed again, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. They built that prison themselves, Sarah, brick by brick, lie by lie, and now they have to live in it. After we hung up, I stood by my window for a long time, watching the sun set. He was right. It wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy of their own making. My only role had been to finally refuse to help them build the walls any higher. I felt no happiness in their fall, only a quiet, resolute peace in my own freedom. That spring, I finally took my vacation. I didn't book a flight to Maine. Instead, I found a small, weathered cottage for rent on the Oregon coast, a place of dramatic, rocky cliffs and perpetually misty mornings. It was the furthest thing from the sun-drenched, performative beaches of Hawaii I could imagine, and it was perfect. For 2 weeks, I did almost nothing of consequence and everything of importance. I read novels on a weathered wooden porch, the salty air turning the pages soft and damp in my hands. I took long, rambling walks along the empty beach, my only companions the gulls crying overhead and the rhythmic, thunderous crash of the Pacific against the shore. I learned to identify the constellations in a vast, dark sky, unpolluted by city lights, feeling a sense of connection to something ancient and immense. There were no dramatic epiphanies, no tearful breakthroughs on a windswept cliff. There was just a quiet, gradual unfurling of a self that had been clenched tight for 3 decades. The cold, hard rage that had fueled my final act had served its purpose. It was the rocket fuel that had blasted me out of a toxic orbit. But you can't live on rocket fuel. Here, in the quiet solitude of the coast, it simply burned away, leaving behind not emptiness, but a clean, calm stillness. I realized I hadn't been breathing fully for my entire life. When I returned, the city felt different, because I was different. The $20,000 I had pledged to the hospital had not gone unnoticed. A week after my return, I received a message on my professional networking profile. It was from an Elizabeth Croft, a name I vaguely recognized from the gala's program. She was a senior VP at a major tech firm in Seattle, and she had been on the hospital board for a decade. Her message was direct. Miss Jennings, I was in the audience at the City General Gala. Your speech was unforgettable. Your professional portfolio is equally impressive. I'll be in town next week and would be very interested in a coffee. We met in a quiet cafe. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. We talked about data trends and predictive analytics for 20 minutes, a brisk and professional exchange. Then she leaned back and gave me a direct, appraising look. "I'll be honest, Sarah," she said. "I looked you up because I was intrigued by your story. I'm hiring you because you're one of the sharpest analysts I've seen in years. But what I also saw that night was integrity, guts. That's not something you can teach." The job offer was in Seattle. It came with a 30% raise, a senior title, and the opportunity to build and lead my own analytics team. It was the kind of career leap I had dreamed of, the kind of validation I had worked tirelessly for years to achieve. But this time it felt different. I wasn't accepting it to prove my worth to a family who would never see it. I was accepting it because I had earned it, and because the thought of a new city, a blank slate, felt less like an escape and more like a homecoming. My chosen family began to take shape, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of kindness and respect. Uncle Ben became my regular Sunday night phone call. We never, not once, talked about the rest of the family. Instead, we talked about his latest woodworking project, my struggles to find good pizza in Seattle, the books we were reading. Our relationship was a quiet harbor, a simple, easy connection built on genuine affection, not on the shifting sands of drama and obligation. In Seattle, I built a new circle from scratch. I joined a hiking club and found friendship on muddy trails overlooking Puget Sound, with people who knew me only as Sarah, the woman who always packed extra trail mix and had a surprisingly dark sense of humor. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding a profound sense of purpose in the quiet, unconditional affection of a 3-legged dog named Gus. My new colleagues became friends. We had potlucks and celebrated project launches with cheap champagne and takeout, our bonds forged in shared work and mutual respect. One evening, my friend Maya, a fellow analyst, was over for dinner. We were sitting on the small balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the glittering lights of the city spread below. "You know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "in the year I've known you, you've never once mentioned your family." A year ago, that simple observation would have sent a jolt of panic through me. I would have deflected or offered a vague, sanitized version of the truth. But now it was just a question. "They're not really in my life anymore," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's a long, complicated story." "I get it," she said with a simple nod, her expression one of easy understanding, not pity. She didn't press for details. She didn't need to. Some families are the ones you're born with, and some are the ones you build. For what it's worth, you're a pretty damn good architect. I looked at her, my friend, this kind, funny, brilliant woman who had no idea what I'd been through but accepted me completely as I was. I looked out at the city that now felt like home, and I realized the profound truth in her words. Family wasn't about blood or shared history. It was about choice. It was about the people who choose to show up, who choose to listen, who choose to respect you. It was about the people who, when you build your own table, are happy to simply pull up a chair and join you for the feast. And my table finally was starting to fill up. 1 year to the day after the gala, I found myself standing on my balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands against the cool Seattle evening air. The city spread out before me, a breathtaking tapestry of light and life, the reflection of the sky mirrored in the dark, still waters of the Sound. The anger, that white-hot furnace that had fueled me for so long, was gone. I searched for its embers within me and found nothing, not even a lingering warmth. It had served its purpose, and then, quietly, it had burned out, leaving behind only peace. I finally understood that what I had done that night wasn't an act of revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, corrosive thing that binds you to your tormentors forever. What I had done was an act of self-preservation. It was an amputation. I had surgically removed the diseased part of my life so that the rest of me could finally heal. For years, I had auditioned for a role in their play, contorting myself into whatever shape I thought they might finally applaud. That night at the gala, I simply refused to take the stage. I was no longer their tragic supporting character. I was the author of my own story now. I thought about love, the word they had thrown around so carelessly. Their love was conditional, transactional, a currency to be earned and spent. It demanded sacrifice, but only in one direction. It demanded loyalty, but offered none in return. I had learned in the quiet years since that true love is not about laying yourself down on the altar of someone else's ego. It is not about unconditional sacrifice for those who are unworthy of the gift. Real love, the kind that sustains and builds, begins with the quiet, unshakable respect you have for yourself. A real family would never make you buy a ticket to get in the door. They would never, ever sell your seat. A real family saves a place for you, always. The best one, right at the heart of the table, kept warm in case you're running late. I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. Down below, the lights of the city glittered, each one a story, a life, a connection. I had my own constellation now, my own small bright circle of light in the vast darkness. I had built a new table, a sturdy one made of respect and kindness, and there was a seat for everyone I loved. And most importantly, there was a seat for me right at the head. A slow smile spread across my face, unbidden and genuine. It wasn't a smile of triumph or victory. It was a smile of contentment, of a deep and settled peace. It was the smile of a woman who was finally, completely, and irrevocably free.